A prospective bride was turned away due to her complexion, a situation that shifted dramatically when a prosperous farmer recognized her as his ideal partner. You are Amara Wilson." The gentleman gulped, his countenance draining of color as though he had encountered a specter in the bright afternoon. "This arrangement will not succeed. You neglected to mention that you are black." Amara completed the thought Harold Pierce was unable to articulate, her spirit sinking as she stood on the train station's platform. The elegant hat she had selected specifically for this occasion now appeared to be a ludicrous accessory amidst the profound humiliation. 3 weeks of travel, 6 months of ardent correspondence, a substantial collection of hopes, and the pledge of a fresh start, far from the prejudice prevalent in the bustling metropolis. All of that disintegrated in mere moments the instant Harold's gaze fell upon her. "In your missives, you expressed yourself with such eloquence. I had envisioned," he stammered, retreating a step, the bouquet of blossoms visibly wilting in his clammy hand. "Could you not have offered a premonition?" Amara inhaled deeply, mustering every remaining vestige of her composure. "Forewarn you of what, precisely? That my skin mirrors the deepest night, yet my sentiments possess a reality equal to your own? You never inquired?" Harold glanced about with apprehension, noticing the inquisitive stares from fellow passengers and railway personnel. Within the confines of the small hamlet of Riverbrook, a woman of color, impeccably attired, was already drawing considerable attention. A woman of color being publicly spurned by a white gentleman presented an irresistible spectacle. "You must comprehend my predicament. The community here, my enterprise," he mumbled, inching further back. "I can facilitate your return passage. You seem educated. I am certain you will comprehend." Amara felt an icy sensation traverse her body, not from sorrow, but from a contained indignation that smoldered beneath the surface. In his letters, Harold had conveyed the yearning of a solitary widower, aged 45, who sought companionship, mutual understanding, and a renewed opportunity for love. At no juncture had he alluded to this heart harboring a preference for a particular skin tone. "I expended my entire savings to reach this destination," she stated, her voice steady despite her internal tremor. "I have no recourse but to return." Harold reached into his coat pocket and produced several creased banknotes. "This should cover temporary accommodation until you resolve your circumstances." It was then that a resonant voice pierced the strained atmosphere with the force of a thunderclap on a clear day. "Is that your proposed resolution, Pierce? To cast money at a problem and anticipate its dissolution, as is your customary approach?" A tall man materialized behind Harold, his penetrating gaze fixed upon the merchant, who now seemed to diminish in stature. He was clad in attire that was both unpretentious and demonstrably costly, the sort of simplicity that only the truly affluent can afford to exhibit. His sun-kissed visage hinted at a life spent outdoors, yet his posture conveyed an undeniable authority. "This is not your concern," Harold responded, though his voice betrayed his apprehension. "It becomes my concern when I observe a man I have known for 15 years behaving with such timidity." The individual identified as Alexander turned his attention to Amara, his expression softening subtly. "Madam, permit me to introduce myself. Alexander Maxwell. I possess an estate just beyond the town's limits." Amara inclined her head stiffly, suspicion coloring her demeanor. From past encounters, she was aware that unexpected kindness from strangers often carried an undisclosed cost. "If I may be so presumptuous," Alexander continued, "I extend an offer of lodging at my residence until you determine your subsequent course of action. We have seldom used guest chambers, and my housekeeper would undoubtedly welcome the company." Harold visibly gagged at the proposition. "Maxwell, you cannot be serious. What will the townsfolk surmise?" Alexander offered a smile, a frigid expression that failed to reach his eyes. "The same individuals who conduct daily commerce with me, the very ones whose sustenance depends on my land. I am intrigued to ascertain their pronouncements." Harold paled further, grasping the implicit message. Alexander Maxwell was not merely a farmer, he was the proprietor of half the arable land in the region. What remained imperceptible to everyone at that station was that while Amara wavered between wounded pride and practical necessity, she carried with her not only a trunk of attire, but also a concealed revelation that would irrevocably alter the power dynamics within that small community. a secret that would render Harold Pierce profoundly regretful of the day he decreed that skin color dictated an individual's inherent worth. If this narrative of prejudice and personal integrity has resonated with you, kindly remember to subscribe to the channel to discover how a profoundly humiliating rejection became the impetus for a monumental shift that no one would ever forget. The Maxwell estate was far more than a mere farm on the outskirts, as its proprietor had modestly characterized it. It was a magnificent Victorian manor, encircled by extensive tracts of flourishing plantations and verdant pastures where magnificent thoroughbred horses grazed peacefully. As Alexander's carriage passed through the elaborately crafted gates, Amara experienced a mixture of awe and apprehension. "The inhabitants here are unaccustomed to diversity," Alexander explained, gesturing toward the main residence. Riverbrook was established by traditional families who have, conveniently, remained ensnared in the past. Harold Pierce is merely a symptom of a more pervasive malady. The housekeeper, Mrs. Foster, a woman of middle years with benevolent eyes and a composed bearing, greeted Amara with professional courtesy. If she harbored any surprise at the presence of a black guest, she offered no indication. "I have prepared the azure chamber, the one affording the most splendid vista of the gardens," she announced, guiding Amara through hallways adorned with priceless artworks and antique furnishings. At the evening repast, served in the grand dining hall, Alexander recounted his history. The scion of a northern banker and a teacher who championed abolitionist causes, he had inherited not only a fortune, but also unwavering principles of equality. Upon his relocation to Riverbrook 15 years prior, he had been perceived as eccentric, too affluent to be ostracized, yet too unconventional to be fully embraced. "And what is your narrative, Miss Wilson?" he inquired at length, after detailing the enterprises he managed. "Your correspondence must have profoundly impressed Harold for him to extend such a formal invitation." Amara hesitated, yet Alexander's direct approach instilled a sense of trust. "I am an educator. I previously instructed literature and history at a school for young ladies of color in Boston. When the institution ceased operations due to financial constraints, I recognized the necessity of commencing anew elsewhere." What Amara omitted was the genuine motivation behind her letters, the unexpected legacy from her grandfather, a man who had dedicated his entire existence as a domestic attendant to a prosperous family. An inheritance that comprised not only diligently accumulated gold coins, but also antique documents capable of altering the destiny of certain parcels of land in the Riverbrook vicinity. Documents she had concealed within a false compartment in her trunk. In the ensuing days, Alexander afforded Amara something remarkably rare: the gift of contemplation. The mansion's library presented a veritable treasure trove of knowledge, and she immersed herself in tomes concerning local history, geography, and regional jurisprudence. When questioned about her pursuits, she would offer a gentle smile and claim she was broadening her intellectual horizons. A week following her arrival, news of her presence had permeated the small community. Visits to the Maxwell estate suddenly proliferated. Inquisitive neighbors, the spouses of merchants, even the local clergymen, all, it seemed, suddenly recalled pressing matters requiring discussion with Alexander. "Just observe," Alexander remarked during afternoon tea, following the departure of a particularly transparent delegation. "You have inadvertently become the local focal point without even setting foot in the town." Amara offered a wry smile. "I have always been a point of interest, Mr. Maxwell. The distinction lies in the fact that I now hold a porcelain teacup while I am under scrutiny." It was during one of these numerous visitations that Harold Pierce finally mustered the courage to present himself. He arrived unannounced, his hat clutched in his hand, his countenance a veneer of feigned concern. "Maxwell," he greeted with evident nervousness. "I merely came to ascertain if Miss Wilson is comfortable." "Absolutely at ease," Alexander replied with dry wit. "Why not inquire of her directly?" Harold's face drained of color as Amara entered the chamber, attired in one of the elegant gowns that Mrs. Foster had expertly tailored for her. She was no longer the weary, mortified woman from the train station, but a lady who moved with an air of confidence and purpose. "Mr. Pierce," she greeted him with palpable coolness. "What an unanticipated cordiality, Miss Wilson." Harold fidgeted with his hat. "I came, that is. The community expresses concern for my well-being. How remarkably solicitous of them regarding your circumstances. Harold cast a sideways glance at Alexander. It is considered improper for an unmarried woman to reside within the dwelling of an unmarried gentleman, particularly when she is of color. Alexander concluded, his voice possessing a dangerous softness. Proceed, Pierce. I am most eager to ascertain how you intend to conclude that observation. Harold swallowed with difficulty. The Congregational Committee is contemplating avenues to facilitate her return to Boston. A collection is presently being organized. Amara's lips curved into a smile, one that conveyed no warmth. How exceedingly generous. However, I fear my intentions have undergone a modification. I intend to establish my residence in Riverbrook indefinitely. Harold's eyes widened in disbelief. That is preposterous. You know no one here. You possess neither employment nor kin. I am employed, Amara responded with composure. Mr. Maxwell has most graciously extended an offer for the position of librarian at his estate. Apparently, numerous generations of Maxwells have amassed a considerable collection of volumes without ever undertaking a proper organizational effort. Harold looked at Alexander with a mixture of astonishment and barely suppressed fury. You cannot possibly be serious. Alexander offered a shrug. I have never been more earnest. Miss Wilson is both educated and proficient. My library has never been in more capable custody. What Harold failed to comprehend as he stumbled through increasingly feeble objections was the true significance of that role. The Maxwell Library did not merely house literary classics. It also contained land deeds, legal documents, and a comprehensive chronicle of the region's history, including details that many of the established families would prefer remain concealed. As Harold finally departed, vanquished and incensed, Alexander observed him from the window as he hastened across the grounds. He will endeavor to impede your progress, he remarked. The minor affront to his ego that you administered today will not be overlooked. Amara nodded, a nascent resolve shimmering in her gaze. Let him attempt. While he occupies himself with the dissemination of petty gossip, I shall be delving far deeper than he could ever conceivably fathom. What Harold Pierce could not have anticipated, what no one in Riverbrook could have conjectured, was that the hours Amara dedicated to the library served a highly specific objective. Amidst time-worn documents and dusty archives, she was meticulously assembling a complex puzzle that would ultimately unveil an unsettling verity. The venerable founding families of Riverbrook, including the Pierces, had amassed their fortunes through landholdings that were not legitimately theirs. And while the local society buzzed with whispered speculations about the woman of color residing at the Maxwell mansion, Amara was discreetly orchestrating an unveiling that would profoundly shake the community to its very foundations. 2 weeks later, the modest assembly hall of Riverbrook's town hall was packed to capacity. An emergency summons had drawn together the founding families, local business owners, and agriculturalists from across the entire territory. At the epicenter of the commotion, Harold Pierce gestured animatedly, his face flushed with outrage. It is an abomination. Maxwell is flagrantly disregarding our established customs by harboring that woman on his property. Reputable families are perturbed by rumors of impropriety. As a ripple of agreement spread through the assembly, the doors swung open. Alexander Maxwell entered with measured composure, followed closely by Amara Wilson, who walked with the regality of a sovereign. An uncomfortable silence descended upon the room. I appreciate the invitation, Alexander stated, his voice firm, resonating in every corner of the hall. Though I must clarify a significant misunderstanding. Miss Wilson is not present as my guest, but rather as the legal representative in a matter that profoundly concerns each of you. Harold emitted a nervous chuckle. Legal representative? A woman of color possessing neither formal education nor any vestige of authority. Maxwell, have you entirely relinquished your senses? Amara opened her briefcase with deliberate precision. Actually, Mr. Pierce, in addition to being a certified educator, I hold legal power of attorney as a direct descendant of Joseph Freeman. The name struck the hushed assembly like a bolt of lightning. The older visages visibly paled. Joseph Freeman does not exist, Harold countered swiftly. He is an urban myth. Curious, Amara replied, retrieving yellow documents from her briefcase. Because I hold here the original land grant, duly signed by the governor in the year 1866, bestowing upon Joseph Freeman, my maternal great-grandfather, and a man emancipated following the Civil War, the land that now encompasses approximately 60% of Riverbrook, including your establishment, Mr. Pierce. Judge Thornton adjusted his spectacles to examine the documents Amara now presented. This appears to be authentic. It is a fabrication, Harold shouted, though his voice quavered. The accompanying records are also present, Amara continued, unperturbed, including the documented account of how Joseph Freeman was compelled to flee following attempted acts of vigilantism in 1870, and how the founding families subsequently partitioned his land amongst themselves, forming what they designated the Riverbrook Property Committee. Alexander then interjected, "The Maxwell Library maintains duplicates of all regional land records. It is peculiar how the specific records from the 1870 to 1872 period were conspicuously absent until Miss Wilson unearthed cross-references within other archival materials." Reverend Miller, an elderly gentleman, bowed his head. "My father alluded to that narrative. He described it as a sin deeply interred. We are not present to penalize the descendants for the transgressions of their forebears," Amara declared. "I am proposing a collaborative arrangement, the establishment of a community trust designed to benefit all citizens of Riverbrook, with a particular emphasis on educational initiatives and accessible housing." Harold Pierce emitted a hollow laugh. "That is utterly preposterous. No one will lend credence to this charade." It was at that precise moment that Attorney Jeff, a distinguished legal practitioner renowned across 3 states, entered the hall. "The documents have undergone verification by the State Historical Records Commission. They are indeed authentic, and I am pleased to inform you all that legal proceedings have been formally initiated." The hall erupted in a cacophony of raised voices. Amidst the prevailing confusion, Harold lunged furiously toward Amara. "You orchestrated this from the very outset," he hissed. "This is what you were concealing within your correspondence." Amara remained remarkably composed. "No, Mr. Pierce. In those letters I was merely a solitary woman seeking companionship. It was your immediate rejection of me, upon witnessing my appearance, that revealed to me the true nature of your character. The kind of individual who would condemn my great-grandfather for the very same reason you judge me, solely based on the hue of our skin. You will bring about our ruin," he muttered, his face ashen. "No," she replied softly. "I intend to rectify a historical injustice in the most equitable manner possible for everyone involved. The fundamental difference between us, Mr. Pierce, is that I have endured prejudice throughout my entire existence, and yet I harbor no desire for anyone to forfeit their home, not even you." As Harold Pierce slumped into a chair in utter defeat, the town council withdrew to deliberate on Amara's proposal. Alexander approached her, admiration clearly evident in his gaze. "You could have demanded everything," he stated softly, "and thereby become indistinguishable from those who pilfered from my great-grandfather," she responded. "Justice is not synonymous with retribution, Alexander. It is about restoration." What no one in that chamber could have possibly fathomed as they observed the woman they had initially rejected and subsequently underestimated was that the genuine metamorphosis of Riverbrook was only just commencing. The message that would reverberate through the corridors of power for generations to come would not concern a woman who arrived to dismantle, but rather one who, even when wounded, chose to rebuild with profound dignity and foresight. And while Harold Pierce confronted the ruination of his reputation, Amara Wilson and Alexander Maxwell exchanged a glance that held promises extending far beyond mere land ownership and legal documents. A look that spoke of a future where belonging would no longer be dictated by complexion, but by inherent character. 6 months subsequent to that momentous assembly at the town hall, Riverbrook had undergone a complete transformation. The Freeman Foundation, established through the recovery of funds stemming from historical injustices, was already actively supporting scholarships for underprivileged youth and facilitating community betterment initiatives. At the forefront of this profound transformation stood Amara, not as a figure of vindictive retribution, but as a visionary who perceived beyond the lingering pain. Harold Pierce's former establishment now housed Riverbrook's inaugural public library, ironically, a sanctuary where long-forgotten narratives could finally find their voice. Harold himself had departed the town weeks after the revelation, liquidating his properties for a mere fraction of their value and leaving without a farewell. Whispers suggested he was employed as a clerk in a neighboring municipality. His pride, it seemed, had diminished in proportion to his depleted bank account. "You possess the capacity to utterly annihilate him," Alexander remarked on a crisp autumn afternoon, as they strolled through the manicured gardens of her estate, which had by then been partially repurposed into a cultural hub. Most individuals would have sought every last cent. Amara smiled, observing children at play on lawns that had once constituted the exclusive domain of the elite. "Vengeance would have provided me with ephemeral satisfaction for a single day. This," she gestured to the expansive surroundings, "will yield gratification for generations." News of the Freeman affairs had transcended Riverbrook's borders, attracting journalists and historians keenly interested in documenting analogous instances of historical land dispossession. Amara received invitations to lecture at academic institutions, eloquently articulating not only her personal odyssey, but also the sophisticated legal methodology she had employed to reinstate truth. During a celebratory banquet held in the Grand Hall of the Maxwell Mansion, subsequently and discreetly renamed Freeman Maxwell House following the union of its proprietors, Judge Thornton raised his glass for an unexpected toast. "To the woman who illuminated our understanding that justice is not merely a legal construct, but a daily practice," he declared, his voice tinged with genuine emotion. "When Amara first arrived in our town, we believed we had accurately discerned her identity based solely on her outward appearance. What a humbling and indeed necessary lesson we subsequently acquired." At his side, Martha Webb, now the esteemed principal of the new community school, nodded in vigorous affirmation. "And to think it all commenced with a cruel dismissal at the very train station." Alexander gently clasped Amara's hand. "The most fortuitous decision Harold Pierce ever made was to reject you," he murmured with a smile, although I entertained doubts as to whether he would concur. In the antiquated Central Plaza, where historically only the established families were honored, a new monument had been erected. It was not an imposing statue, but rather a simple bronze plaque narrating the compelling story of Joseph Freeman and how his unjustly appropriated land had ultimately been restored to its intended purpose of serving the entire populace. As nightfall enveloped Riverbrook, Amara gazed upon the distant town lights from her newly acquired veranda. She had arrived as an ostracized stranger, a black woman deemed unworthy of belonging. Now she was not only accepted, but deeply respected, not for conforming to the expectations of others, but for steadfastly upholding her personal principles. When Alexander joined her, bearing 2 steaming cups of tea, Amara reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this juncture. "You know what possesses a certain irony?" she inquired. "Harold rejected me because he was incapable of envisioning a shared existence with someone who deviated from his rigidly confined worldview. Ultimately, it was that very limitation that precipitated his downfall, whereas you flourished precisely because of that which he disdained, your resilience, your heritage, your unwavering truth," Alexander added. The profound lesson that Riverbrook absorbed, and one that would echo through the ages, was both simple and exceptionally significant. When we render judgment upon an individual based on superficial attributes, we not only deny their inherent humanity, but also blind ourselves to the extraordinary value they possess, the potential to contribute to our lives. And, as Amara Wilson Maxwell observed, the moon ascend over the very town that had once cast her aside, she understood that true retribution had never resided in punishing Harold Pierce. It lay instead in constructing something so exquisitely beautiful, so profoundly equitable, and so enduringly substantial that his act of rejection would ultimately recede into nothing more than a footnote within the far grander narrative that was presently unfolding. Should this account of triumph over bias and the pursuit of fairness with grace resonate with you, kindly consider subscribing to our channel for further uplifting narratives that serve as potent reminders that our distinctions are not impediments, but rather wellsprings of resilience capable of reshaping entire societies. Tranquility